Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Let's see if this works. Yeah, we're pleased you're here. And as Deb already explained, it's a masterclass. What does that mean? Well, a masterclass means that you're not just, sitting and listening and consuming. You're only going to do stuff and practice stuff, so you learn stuff that you can explain other people about evidence-based practice and how to critically appraise research. So I'm going to give you a very short introduction into what is evidence-based practice or evidence-based decision-making, and I'm also going to give you a crash course in critical appraisal. Now, I have 15 minutes to do the introduction on evidence-based management, what is it, and 15 minutes to explain how critical appraisal works. I see people who done the online course smiling like, haha, good luck with that. Because there's way more to it, that's true, but we're going to give you a quick run through and then we give you some examples and let you work with the stuff. You have some papers here, including some scientific papers, and we'll let you struggle a bit with it. Okay, so what is it, why do we need it, and a crash course in critical appraisal. I'm from the Center for Evidence-Based Management. If you put it shortly, it's CEPMA, and you can see we're all kind of clever people here. They started long time ago, 15 years ago, and their idea was to promote the idea of evidence-based practice or decision-making in the field of organizations. We already had this in medicine, but in our field, in organizational decisions, it was actually not very common. So we promote it, we give talks, we do these workshops and stuff like that. I have a colleague who is very active on Twitter, but we also educate. That is actually our main focus. So we are teaching and we're involved in the teaching at a lot of universities, about 50 or 60 universities worldwide that use our educational materials to teach or educate decision makers, future decision makers, to make better, more evidence-based decisions. We also do this in organizations, so like here, but also with OzChild, but also Novartis, big HSBC, banking firms, Flemish government, etc., etc. That's what we do. And finally, last but not least, we also support organizations when they have an issue, or for instance, when they hire a consulting firm and the consulting firm says, oh, based on our analysis, this is what you should do. And then we come in and we're sort of bullshit filter to figure out, well, that's not really what the evidence says, etc. So we're also a critical voice, a sort of devil's advocate. Clever people who started this, but actually the most important asset of our organization are these people, fellows and members. We're more like a sort of community of practice. We're a non-profit organization, we're stupid with money, we're very mission-driven, and we have young people, old people, we have old professors, but also young puppies that work in an organization and promote evidence-based practice. If you promote evidence-based practice or make a contribution in your field, in your sector, or in your organization, we will invite you and your face will be up there, like Lisa's face is up there as well, because she does such tremendous things in the sector here in child welfare in Australia. So, what does that even mean, the term evidence-based? Why do we need that? Aren't we doing a great job? And the critical appraisal, and time for your questions. Now, if you Google evidence-based, you can see there are more than 71 million hits. That means it's not all me or Lisa made up this term. It's something that exists and it's out there and is used widely. And if you go a little bit further, you say, okay, evidence-based practice, oh, still 11 million hits. If you go to evidence-based management, 1.6 million. So it's still there. You see all kind of combinations with the term evidence-based. Here's KPMG, big posh consulting firm, using the term evidence-based HR, and they say, the bridge between your people and delivering business strategy. I don't know what it means, but apparently that's what they make of the term evidence-based. Here's the guy who actually promoted this within KPMG. His name is Robert Bolton. He said, hey, listen, in organizations, you use all these engagement questionnaires and engagement surveys to measure employee engagement. Stop it. It's not evidence-based. What does that mean? Here's a guy who is very nervous when it comes to the term evidence-based, and he banned it. He said, no, I don't want to, we don't need that, we don't need that. Now you may think like, oh Eric, you're getting into a sort of ideological, political discussion. This could be, you know, very sensitive, watch out there. Well, actually it's not. These are the Republicans in the United States in 2019, and they introduced or signed into law the foundations for evidence-based policy making. There you go, again the term evidence-based. So what is the core of evidence-based? We wrote this down for you. So if you get this question this weekend, maybe when you have a party or you meet up with friends and say, how was your week? You say, well, I did this masterclass on evidence-based decision-making, and people say, what is that? Then this is your answer. The central idea of evidence-based decision-making or evidence-based practice is that your decisions or your practice should be based on the best available evidence. Now, that's not very helpful, because what does that mean? I'm not a native speaker, but I can tell you evidence is actually a sort of fancy term for facts, information, data, whatever, but not in itself. It's facts, information, or data in relation to a claim, an issue, an assumption, or a hypothesis. So there's an issue, there's an assumption, there's an idea that you want to do something or decide something, and then the question is, what is actually the information, facts, or data supporting this? And that's what we mean with evidence. And where can it come from? Well, it can come from so many sources. It can come from scientific research. There's so much research that is relevant for us when we make decisions. But it can also come from your organization. Organizations collect a lot of data. Data analytics is now a very popular thing. A lot of organizations are into data analytics. Yes, that's a very important source of evidence. Best practices. Even your personal experience as you are here counts as a source of evidence. Now you may say, yeah, but it's really silly then, because then anything goes. You know, I mean, can you make a decision without any evidence? There's always some kind of evidence. Yeah, we base our decisions always on some kind of evidence. But that's not the point. The point is most people base the decisions only on a few sources of evidence. That's number one. And number two, they fail to have a look at the trustworthiness, the strength, the reliability of the evidence. So the core of evidence-based practice is try to prevent not to make decisions based on one source and have a look at the trustworthiness. Now, what do you think is the most frequently used source when a decision is being made? Anyone? What could that be? Looking at you. Oh. Yeah. Why? Yeah, you're off the hook. Thank you. Yeah, because it's here. It's easy accessible. I bring it around. So you know, when a decision being made, I think, oh, you know, my personal experience sends me this, etc. So that is the most frequently used source of evidence. Unfortunately, that's not the most reliable source of evidence, as we will see. So is this an evidence-based decision? This is Ricky Gervais in the office, a dodgy manager. We all know him. Hey, trust me, I have 20 years of management experience. I know what to do. Is that an evidence-based decision? No, it's only one source, the personal experience of this guy, and that's not enough. That's a single source decision. And 20 years of management experience, I don't know, maybe this guy is making mistakes for 20 years, doing horrible things, and he says, yeah, that's my experience, etc. So that's not a good source. So here's a picture that we developed. It's not the truth, it's a model. If you say, oh, but I can come up with 6 sources of evidence, whatever, but it's a sort of reminder. If you make a decision, ask yourself, think about, is there any scientific literature? And we mean empirical studies published in peer-reviewed journals, so the hardboard research. What do practitioners know about this topic? Do they have experience with this? Have they seen it before? What is their judgment? Another important source. Organizational data, well, becoming more and more relevant. And finally, stakeholders' values and concerns. They're subjective, but it's a very important source of evidence. Stakeholders, your clients, the children, the people who fund your organization, your employees. Usually there are a lot of stakeholders you need to take into account. And you can see in the middle there are 6 steps, because evidence-based practice, evidence-based decision-making is a process. You go through these steps. It's not something that we're going to address today. We're going to have a look at the step appraise, critically appraise the evidence, and have an example of some research findings. That's a process. And what you see on the left and the right, it's not only about solution. If we do this, that will work out, or this will go better. It is also towards the problem. What exactly is the problem? We have a shortage of foster carers, right? Is that the problem? Well, what causes this problem? What do we know? How big is this problem? What do practitioners feel about this? Is there maybe research on this topic? What do stakeholders say? What do organizational data tell us about that problem? So not only the solution, also the problem to start with. First question of evidence-based practice is, what's the problem we're trying to solve here? And that's always the starting point. Okay, it started in medicine, education spilled over. Here you can see Center for Evidence-Based Medicine in Oxford. Those are the people that were actually very helpful when we started, because it started in medicine in the early 90s. It's a professional standard for all physicians, but nowadays also nurses, to work in an evidence-based way. But there's even more, because also the police is now trying to work in a more evidence-based way. I mean, wearing a body cam in the United States, does it really prevent police officers from using excessive force, yes or no? Other stuff, there's a lot of things going on when it comes to evidence-based policing. You can see 2013 was already a conference on evidence-based policing, and there's even a society. Education, very important. We want to educate children, people in an evidence-based way, not with the newest fancy model or educational approach. We want to know whether it works. Evidence-based policy, specifically in Australia, I noticed it's becoming bigger and bigger, but also in the United States as a way to get out of discussion about ideology, but let's focus on the evidence and see what really works. Evidence-based agriculture, who knew? I didn't, but apparently is there. And a couple of years ago, we were together with all kinds of evidence-based movements, and there were at least 27 sectors there, you know, veterinary medicine, I mean, there was a lot of evidence-based stuff there. So whatever you mention after the term evidence-based, orthopedic surgery, policy making, child welfare, whatever is there, we all have in common 2 things. It's the use of multiple sources of evidence and critically appraised. That's the core of evidence-based practice. Okay? Well, that's a no-brainer. We should all do this. I mean, why aren't we doing this? Well, we have a lot of barriers. People feel it's common sense, but if you look at organizations, it does not always happen. First of all, people are not always aware that there's a lot of research outcomes, for instance, or scientific studies. So one of my students in Amsterdam is the HR director of KLM Air France, and like a lot of organizations, they have a big problem with absenteeism and turnover, certainly after COVID. So they set up a task force to tackle that problem, and people in the organizations and executives, and then try to come up with a plan. And when I said, did you have a look at the research findings? So, no, why? Do you know that there's at least 80 years of research on that topic? There are thousands of studies. Maybe, I don't know, maybe it could be an idea to have a look what is known there. So the awareness is not always there. That's a big caveat, big barrier. The other thing is it undermines formal authority. So we hire a young person, Ursula, and she's new in our organization, and we have this very experienced HR director making a claim, and Ursula said, well, I had a look at it, and actually research findings suggest that it's actually not really correct, and it's also not very effective. That's embarrassing. Because what evidence-based practice does is create a level playing field. It's not about your pay grade. It's not about your years of experience or your fancy title. It's the evidence you bring to the table. And if we're at the table, everyone can bring evidence to the table. And that's what we're going to talk about. The quality of the evidence, the trustworthiness of the evidence, applicability of the evidence. That's the discussion we're having, and not your pay grade or your personal opinion. So that's a barrier, because that can be very threatening. A lot of people think, we don't have the time for that stuff, Eric. I mean, 4 sources of evidence, come on, you know, let's do one and let's get on with it. Nah, you will learn that you can do this very quickly. Specifically when you also invest in your organization and you have some people that are knowledgeable on these 4 sources. The other thing, managers are not necessarily rewarded for doing what works. They get rewarded to get things done. And no matter what those things are, if we implement them, then we're happy, regardless whether those things really are effective and maybe not even evidence-based. And finally, a lot of managers and a lot of people in general love new things. We love new treatments, we love new models, we love new cutting-edge insights. Specifically, consulting firms thrive on that. That's their business, to sell you that stuff and to implement that in your organization. But yeah, then asking, yeah, but what is the evidence actually for this new thing, whether it's agile or lean management or this type of model? That's a bit of a spoiler, because hey, we're going to do this, and yeah, we like doing new things, and then there's some evidence-based critical thinkers saying, but are we sure that this is going to solve our problem? That is an important barrier. So why do we need it? Well, we just heard it's important to have a critical perspective on new things that are pushed in organizations, but it's broader, and I hope that after today, you will not focus only on your own sector, but also apply it a little bit broader in life. Because we hear claims all the time, whether it's claims about, you know, shampoo, washing your hair, cures all your dandruff. Really, what's the evidence? Is there any studies, etc.? Try to question claims being made, and especially in your own organization when it comes to the care of children or vulnerable people, but you can also broaden it up. To give an example, yeah, it can make you a very nasty person at some point, so you need to be careful a little bit. So like me, when I was on a holiday and there was a young couple and they had a baby, and when the baby was fed, then they walked around through the room with the baby all the time like this. And I thought, what are they doing? Yeah, that's, you know, because the baby needs to burp. And I looked on Google Scholar, and turns out that there is indeed several studies suggesting that it's actually not necessary, and it's not always a good idea to do that. So you can apply this in all kinds of situations, but be careful, because it's not always a message you want to share. Now, what I just told you is a simple example, not very harmful, but this is an example from childcare that lots of people know, which is a little bit more nasty. This is Dr. Spock, famous pediatrician in the 50s and 60s. All parents then had the book, and he had this very strong recommendation: lie babies down to sleep on their belly, please. That is the best way to let babies sleep. And that advice had support to the 90s, so a long time. However, some of you probably already know this, when you look at the epidemiological studies, you can see that actually when the advice kicked in, the number of cot deaths, this is Dutch numbers, skyrocketed, sudden infant death, so a lot of baby died. And then we found out actually that lying babies to sleep on their belly is the most important risk factor for sudden infant death, so you should not do that. Other example, child welfare as well, Scared Straight. Maybe you know the program. Scared Straight makes great television. If you look it up on Google, or sorry, on YouTube, you see a great documentary about how they take these boys that are young juvenile delinquents and you know, they don't shape up, so let's scare the crap out of them and bring them to this hospital, this prison with all these nasty gang dudes that are there for life, and show them where they will end up if they don't change their behavior, and they're there for a whole day, and it's horrible, and they cry like, oh, and then at the end say, but you can change your life. You can prevent from coming here if you shape up a rule, like, hey, if you do this, watch it, scare them. Turns out actually that programs such as Scared Straight increase delinquency relative to doing nothing at all. So we are harming children by sending them to these programs. But still, these programs are there in the United States and other places, and again, they make for great television. There you go. So why do we need it? We have a great brain. That brain of ours works very well. We can make good decisions. We're not stupid. But it depends on how you feed your brain. If you feed your brain with garbage, it's garbage in, garbage out. You need to make sure that your brain is fed with multiple sources of evidence, not only one source. And you need to have some certainty that the evidence you feed your brain with is trustworthy and you can rely on this. Specifically when it comes to professional expertise, this is Daniel Kahneman. He won the Nobel Prize for decision making and specifically research on how our brain works. And what do you know? He said, I've been studying this for 45 years. But that doesn't help. I know all these biases. I can tell you how it works. I did the research, but I still fall for all these biases. Not that the fact that I'm aware of these biases, that I can overcome them. You need to go one step further. So you can, as an individual, it's hard on your own, but if you have multiple sources of evidence, you have a better chance of overcoming your biases. Specifically when you also have a look at how trustworthy actually is the evidence that is available. So, okay, so critical, you'll be good at the end of the day. So critical appraisal of studies. Number one rule, the authority or popularity of an insight or paper or whatsoever is not a quality criterion. We say, yeah, but it was in the Lancet. I don't care if it was in the Lancet. Lancet retracts a lot of papers. In fact, how more prestigious the paper, the more likely or the more often that articles or insights are retracted. Now, this is Daniel Kahneman. We just saw him. He won the Nobel Prize, but you know, a couple of years ago, some of his articles were retracted, but turned out because the way it was researched was flawed or there was something wrong. That happens all the time. That's how research works. So that's number one. Keep that in mind. Don't be impressed by big names. That's what we call authority bias. We don't fall for that. We look at the study itself, not the people who conducted it. All types of research needs to be critically appraised, regardless of what it is. So this is a book by Ben Goldacre. Ben Goldacre has been very important in medicine. He is a columnist for The Guardian. But he's a physician, and he has made a huge contribution to the uptake of evidence-based medicine and specifically to improve the quality of research because there is a lot of bad science. We have this natural respect for research. You say, oh, I went to this workshop and there were 2 professors. That doesn't mean anything. And the fact that it was published in a scientific paper, etc., is in itself not enough. A lot of research is flawed. A lot of research is actually not applicable. We can't use it. It's unclear, understandable, etc. And when we look at research, we look at 2 things. And the first one is hard for me to pronounce as a non-native speaker, but it's called methodological appropriateness. And that means, is this study the best way to answer this type of question? Because researchers have all kinds of questions and different type of questions. Well, every type of question needs its own type of research. There's not one size fits all. And the other thing is, okay, it's the good type of research. This is the best way to answer this question. But how did they do that? Did they do this in a good way, or did they nasty things and actually there are a lot of weaknesses? So one is but how you execute the research, and the other one is but the research itself, the type of research. Is this the best way to do that? Now we're going to have a look only at the methodological properties. It's like You see this square doesn't fit in the round hole. This is, in terms of appropriateness, a bad fit. And that counts for a lot of research. Here's some examples of types of questions. For you, often, one of the most important types of questions is about impact or effect, or if I do this, will that come out? It's about causality. I do this, and because of that, this will come out. But that's only one type of question. Researchers, and you, may also be interested in, okay, so if we do A, after a while, can we expect B? That's about prediction. It's a different type of question. It's not the same. It's related, but it's not the same. Or we want to know, is A different from B? Are women different when it comes to A compared to men? Now, questions about difference between groups, countries, or whatever, is a question that you see very often in research. How often does it occur? How often do people that say that they do not want to be a foster carer anymore give as a reason, as a motivation, X? It's about frequencies. Doesn't mean that that is per se the reason why they no longer want to be a foster carer, but it's mentioned frequently. We also wonder, how do people feel about that? What are the motivations? How do people perceive things? And why actually does A occur? Why does it that, you know, people in child welfare, nurses, actually don't get paid that much, but they're very, very engaged. They're very, very committed to what they do. Why is that? That's a legitimate question, but that is a different question than does A cause B. Now, the A cause B, we're going to zoom into that because that is an important question when it comes to, does this work? Should we do this? Does this yield to these outcomes? So that's about cause and effect. Let's have a look at it. For impact questions, there's the problem that you and I, our brain, always sees connections. We see patterns. We see causal relations in the world. Something happens over there, and then something happens over there, and immediately our brain connects the two. The problem, therefore, if you would ask professionals like, do you think this works? Yeah, I saw that it works, you know, here and we did this and then there, but that is not always reliable. We need to have some safeguards because this is how it works. If I eat berries in the morning and I get sick in the afternoon, I may conclude correctly that these berries are poisoned and I should not eat them. And I warn you, hey, listen, these berries, they look nice, don't eat them. This makes you sick and poisonous, etc. Here's another example. Here's this guy, he's a rookie for the Major League Baseball. He's going to have his first match, and he's so nervous he forgets to shave. And then he's at the bat, and my God, the first hit, he hits a home run. What do you think this guy is going to do next game? Probably not shave, but that's bullshit. Yeah, but that's how our brain works. We see, you never know. So that's why athletes and sports people are often very, very superstitious and have all these things, etc. If you look like Rafael Nadal, I think he's one of the most superstitious and nervous people. Has all kinds of rituals before he does something. And that are false causality. But that's how our brain, that's harmful. I mean, for now, this is okay. Here's the problem with cause and effect is a thing that we call confounders. Nice word, but it actually means it confounds relationships. So we know for sure, because we can measure this and we see this all the time, if we sell more ice to children, children eat more ice cream, then we see also an increase in children drowning. Now your brain starts to work already. Why would that be? Is there a causal relation? And my grandma always says, yes, Eric, there is a causal relation. There's a plausible explanation for that. If a child eats ice cream, their tummy gets cold, and then your body responds by retracting the warm blood out of your arms and legs, you know, to warm you up. And if you go to swim after you eat an ice cream, then your arms get tired and you drown. Now, that's absolute nonsense, it's absolute bullshit, sounds nice, because there's a confounder. The people who did the course are not allowed to say, but what is the confounder here? Nice weather. There you go. The confounder is the sun. When it's nice weather, children will eat more ice cream. When it's nice weather, children will go out swimming more, and unfortunately, then you can expect that more children will drown. So here, what are the confounders here? At primary school, children with a large shoe size have better handwriting. Who? What's going on here? That's weird. Yeah, age. Age. The confounder here is age. When the children are small and in their first grade, they can't write that well, and then they grow, and then they handwriting improves, etc. People who drink alcohol are more likely to die of lung cancer. By the way, the same is true for people that gamble a lot. What is the confounder here? Smoking, yes, because it often goes together. If you go to Las Vegas, all casinos, you're allowed to smoke. And that is there for a reason. Finally, if you can crack this one, the people who did the course are not allowed to say anything. But if you crack this one, I have deep respect for you. It took the researchers years and years to figure this out. Children, and we talk about little children, 2 or 3 years old, who use a nightlight are more likely to develop myopia, nearsightedness. Anyone wants to give it a try?
They already had it.
Yeah, I was hoping for answers like, yeah, but they under the blankets. That's why I said 2 or 3 years old, so they don't do that yet. But your brain, again, is desperately looking for a causal explanation, because that's what we like. And if we can't find a causal explanation, we get nervous, because we want to keep things under control. So the question is, who puts the nightlight there? Mommy and Daddy. Why do Mommy and Daddy put the nightlight there? Because they are nearsighted, and therefore they want to see. So the confounder here is genes, it's hereditary, and it took a while to figure that out. So this is what we need to be careful. If we just measure relationships, things can go wrong. So we need more than just measure a relationship between things. So there are 3 criteria when it comes to causal relationships. Number 1, the cause and the fact should always be related. If I do something here, then something should happen over there. If I wiggle A, then B, the outcome should also move upwards or downwards, I don't care. But if I do something there and nothing happens there, there is no causal relationship. So that already makes that you need to have very reliable measurements. Because if your measurements, your tools are not good enough, you will measure stuff and it's actually not there and you assume a relationship. The other one is that the cause needs to precede the effect in time. First the cause and then the outcome. Otherwise, we don't know. Maybe it was already there. We did something and this beautiful outcome we measure, but maybe it was already there. So we need to have a pre-measure. Finally, that's a bit corny, like, yeah, should not be other plausible explanations for the effect found. That means we need to have a control group. We do something here, and there needs to be a fair comparison with something else. Because if it happens here and it happens there, then it was something else. So we need a control group and preferably randomized. So if we only have a correlation, how are we doing? Oh, we're doing good, right? Yeah. Reliable measurements. Okay, so here the Americans, did you know, by the way, that over 37% report less than daily flossing and slightly over 32% say they never floss? Ooh. How did they measure that, you think? Is there a camera in every American citizen, in the bathroom, and also in the car? You may floss in the car, so do you think that happened? No. So what is more likely that they did? They asked, hello, can I ask you something, Alison? How often do you floss your teeth? And you go like, oh, all these people here. Oh, 3 times, 4 times a week at least. Yeah, sometimes every day. So you can feel there's a lot of social desirability bias here as well. So this is not a really good, I mean, trustworthiness of 32%. I mean, that's pretty, wow. If we measure a correlation, so we have good measures, then we get the problem that we have spurious correlations. So the divorce rate in Maine correlates perfectly with the consumption of margarine. If the consumption of margarine goes up a little bit, the divorce rate goes up, and when it goes down, it goes down. You can see a perfect match. Now, we all know that's bullshit, that can't be true, but it's there if you measure it, and there are lots and lots of weird examples. So we need to do more than just measuring something afterwards or whatsoever. We need a before and after measure, because Usain Bolt, was he the fastest? I don't know. That depends only on one thing, whether they left at the same point. Because here you can see, oh, yeah, no, not equal at baseline. So we need, we need to have a baseline to figure out whether there indeed, was a causal relationship, otherwise we can't say. So here's one, and I'll already give it away. There's a problem with the baseline here. We know from research that young people that smoke tend to have better lung capacity than youngsters who don't smoke. What is going on here? Is this true? Yes, this is true. Absolutely. It's used by the tobacco industry years to say, well, smoking. What do you think? Think about terms of pre-measure. Was there a pre-measure? No, there was no pre-measure. If there was a pre-measure, what do you think they would find? There was already a difference. Because if you have asthma and you have problems with your lungs, you're not likely to start smoking. And that's why there's an overrepresentation of children with bad lung capacity in the group that doesn't start smoking. So that's important why we need to have also pre-measure. Finally, control group, we need to randomize to two conditions. We have a fair comparison, and otherwise you will find that giving sugar pills to people will cure or have an effective treatment as an impact on diabetes 1 in a positive way, but also headaches, migraine, etc. That's what we call the placebo effect. When there are people involved, there's a placebo effect. Whatever. If you say, hi there, I'm a researcher, and then something already happens. If someone puts on a white coat, say, hi, I'm your doctor, it already has an impact. So therefore, that's what you usually do with medication. Does the medicine work, or was it a doctor that provided it and would it have an impact? Finally, we're getting at the end of the critical appraisal. Be careful with single studies. Google is your friend, but there are so many studies that if you Google correctly, you will always find a study that supports your point of view. How wacky and crazy it is, whether the world is flat or whatsoever. Now here's an example. If you pray for someone on the coronary care unit, does it have a positive effect? It's a legitimate question. You could say, well, Eric, this is religion and science, that doesn't make be careful. No, it's a claim, it's an idea. And does it work? Well, what do you know? There's here a randomized, controlled, before-after measurement, what we call a randomized control study. They did it very clever. Rather than praying at the bedside, they did remote praying, so the patients were not aware whether there was someone praying for them, yes or no. And wow, they found an effect. But it's only one study. So be careful for cherry picking. You should not cherry pick. Here's an overview of the study. Study number 6 showed a positive effect. Yeah, but there were 8 other studies actually that showed a negative effect. So we don't look at one study. Preferably, we look at the whole range. So this is the hierarchy of evidence when it comes to cause and effect. At the bottom, what we call cross-sectional studies. No pre-measure, no control group. We just do one thing. We send out a survey. You all fill it in, and then we see whether there are differences, and we ask opinions, and we measure stuff, etc. That's what we call cross-sectional. A controlled or a longitudinal study, one of the two, is already better. We go one up. If it's n-controlled and longitudinal, there was a pre and a post measure measured over a longer period, and there was a control group, that's even more great. And finally, when it's randomized and controlled and longitudinal, that's what we call a randomized controlled trial or an RCT, that's the best. And finally, it's a little bit misleading, when there are studies of studies, so the study is actually a literature review or a meta-analysis or a systematic review. What they did was looking at other studies rather than collecting primary data. Then you go one up. So the best available or the best evidence for cause effect studies is a meta-analysis or systematic review or literature review of randomized controlled studies. If it's a meta-analysis or literature review of cross-sectional studies, we go up one, and that's level C. So the meta-analysis gives you one little bump up, and then it's a little bit better. Okay, finally, it's about the best available evidence. Would be nice if we all have randomized controlled trials, meta-analysis. Are there any randomized controlled trials when it comes to smoking and lung cancer? No, that would be very ethical. They would say, hello, young children, you don't smoke, right? And you're all okay, no cancer, good. We're going to randomize the two groups, and there you go. You're going to smoke a lot, one package a day, and you, for the next 20 years, don't smoke, and let's see who gets lung cancer. You can't do that. So this is an ideal situation, but you can imagine that for some issues, there is not the top available. We need to go lower. Okay, that's what we're going to do. Quick checklist. How did they measure that? How did they collect the data? Is that a reliable way to do that? Can I reproduce it the way they described it, or is there no information? Was there a pre-measure? Was there a control group or a comparison group? Did they compare things like we do something here and something there? And finally, were there other studies? Any questions in this? Okay, 5 minutes later, we're good. Questions?
Like, as for instance, in evidence-based models, there might be the model creator, and there's some where, you know, maybe it's 100 studies, so you do have a lot of studies, but maybe 80 of those 100 are from people affiliated in some way with the model, or just the fact, you know, like the impetus to publish, you know. Like,
yeah, so yeah, that's a good. Yeah, so you mentioned 2 or 3 things. First of all, does it matter who publishes the study or did the research? Well, if it's the butcher that, you know, qualifies its own meat, then we have a problem. So yes, in scientific studies, it is required that you explain that there is a tie between you and the topic or the subject or whatsoever. So in that way, we try to prevent that. So we're extra critical. That's why we have peer reviewers that have a look at like, okay, is this okay? So that always needs to be mentioned if there's a relationship between me and the model or the thing or the intervention in our research. And the other thing about great research, research that is in drawers that does not have, you know, it was never published and may have different outcomes. In medicine, that's crucial. That's why we came up, Ben Goldacre did a lot on that area. So that's why they invented the whole idea of systematic reviews, where they also send out a message to everyone. Hi there, is there anyone who did a study on this topic? And they send an email to all researchers and the message boards, etc. In our field, in management, we are less dominated by commercial parties like Novartis or pharmaceutical companies that have an interest to hold back the research when the outcome is negative. So for instance, in the question about foster carers, a shortage, etc., there are not that many commercial interests there, so we're usually okay. Anyone else? No? Over here? No? You have enough information now to crack all scientific studies that, oh.
Maybe Lisa, this will be one of the things that we talk about later, is about how you, so I love this stuff, but how you slow things down enough to have people listen, because often when you're in the session or you're with a funder, there's a keenness to get to an outcome, and sometimes it's already in the minds of somebody who wants. I'm just interested in the strategies that you might use to be heard, but also not allow the people on the other side to push you into something that you know isn't going to work?
Yeah, well, those are actually two things. One is people already have a sort of favorite outcome or favorite solution. This is what we call solutioneering, backward solutioneering, like, we have a problem, we should do this. And then we try to, with confirmation bias, we select, you know, stuff that supports our belief and supports our preferred outcome. That's the reason why we have research. That's the reason why we take an evidence-based approach. You will notice that some of these studies go through a lot of length to have a look at all the papers that were published and make sure, and they write down, this is what I did, and then I did this and this and this. So if I would do the same, it's transparent, and I should come up with the same outcome. The other thing is more political and in terms of dynamics, organizational dynamics. You have organizations that you know don't like to have a discussion about possible solutions and what's the evidence, etc. Hey man, come on, it's very disruptive. So the final step in evidence-based practice in our online course is about how do you do this in an organization? If I walk in after decision is being made to do X, and I go to the board and say, hey guys, you made a mistake, look at this, no, it's not going to work, I'm sorry, this is the evidence. That's not very helpful. You need to learn as an evidence-based manager to pick your moments, to take your time to figure out what is the best way. Decisions are not made in the boardroom, well, the final decision, but it starts way earlier in the organization. And last word, don't become an evidence-based fundamentalist, like, oh, but they're no randomized controlled trials, so this is all crap. No. Try to add value and try to be respectful to the people that don't take an evidence-based approach and truly believe that they're doing a great thing, but be respectful and slowly start, you know, nibbling a little bit like, hey, did you see this? Worries me a little bit because, yeah, did you see the outcomes? Yeah, maybe we should take that into account. Slowly you build your case rather than just going through the front door and confront them with the evidence that, you know, shows that they're wrong and they're stupid, etc. You need to protect the ego of people because otherwise they won't be willing to reconsider their decision. Okay.
Well, maybe we can put it into practice after the break here. So the question there about slowing down, and particularly when we often in the sector, I don't know, there's a few colleagues that are here from the department, we're funded to deliver something, and have we ever stopped and asked, well, what's the evidence behind what you're asking us to deliver? So after the break, we've got 15-20 minutes now to give you a quick comfort stop, get yourself a cup of tea, get yourself a cake, come back in, and we will get straight into how we find and use research evidence in our sector. I have to stand here so I can see everyone, and I can see the camera for our Queensland colleagues who were far north and couldn't get to come down to Brisbane this week. For those of you in the front row, I don't have a gun in my pocket, but I do have this handy-dandy little strap thing going on so that I don't have to project my voice. All right, let's get into how we do evidence-based decision-making in our sector. And first thing is, I'm going to state the obvious. We collect a lot of data. So, over on my table over here, my lovely friend Lynette, what kind of data do you collect at Windermere?
Impact data on some of the services that we deliver in the organisation. We're collecting data all the time about productivity, we're collecting data about no-shows, we're collecting data about people that we work with, and then we do that. We've got a whole lot of data about our staff, data about our finances, data about, everything. How many many people come into the building, how many people leave the building. We've got data on that. How many people use the cars and don't use the cars. You've got me on the roll, Dad. You want me to keep going?
Makes the point, right? Lots of organisational data there. What else? What about at the, who's here from the department? Anyone from the department?
I didn't get that. Could you try again?
No one here from the department? No funders here, all sector people? Oh, all one person. Not people. What do you collect over there at the department?
Unfortunately, a lot of inputs, like funding and hours and things like that, although we are moving better to the outcomes.
Right.
In terms of
Yeah.
sector data, but then of course we similar, where everybody moves, where everybody goes, what everybody does and doesn't do. We get that as well.
Yeah, so it would be fair to say that we collect a lot of data, yeah? Would it be fair to say this? How on earth with Lynette didn't even stop. She was on a roll. But how on earth do we know that this informs our work or even improves our work, yeah? And then we've got other data sets. We've obviously got the department collecting information, but we've all seen the data from the Australian Institute of Health and Wellbeing. We all take a little gasp every year. We get excited, just when I know it's a lag data measure, but we're always interested to find out because it's got the key child protection measures. Then we've got the Family Matters report, and we all, do a big sigh every year because they've got their scorecard and it's in red, amber and green in terms of how we're measuring ourselves, and most of that scorecard tends to stay red. We've got our closing the gap targets. The lovely thing that the department provides us with is our performance KPIs. We'll get recouped if we don't get those children in those foster care beds. And then we've got contractual obligations. Same thing, isn't it, really? I mean, we get all this information and we get a little bit sort of, excited about it, and then we think, oh, well, are we actually going to do anything with that information? And then we do this. We flip around and what we privilege as evidence. For years, we neglected the client voice. Many organisations, I know my good friend Lynette is exceptional in this area in regards to ensuring that client voice, consumer voice is instrumental. We collect information there. But again, even when we do that, we're not really sure how it improves our work. We collect it, but we're not quite yet. Unless somebody can give me an outstanding example, but my observation in the sector is we've done a lot of great work in finding data, and I've been on a couple of groups. They're called the Data-Driven Decision-Making Advisory Group. I got really excited when I got invited to this group. And they wanted to boot me out because I said, well, why are you just looking at data? They said, well, I think it's important. Like, what are you going to do with it? So we're not really sure quite yet how we crack the nut of how it's going to improve our work. And the last one, how many in the room have been invited to co-design a new program or a service? Anyone? Do you remember a few years ago we got into co-design? That became the thing. Anyone? I've been to one. Yeah, we've been to one. So we're co-designing a new program or a service. What sort of sources of data do we use? Who came? Who came to your co-design workshop?
Members of the community and clients.
Okay, that's positive. That's great.
Young people.
Young people.
Members of the community that were relevant, I guess, to the topic that we were talking about.
Right.
Like police and
Okay.
other interested community members.
Interested community. Okay. All right, so hypothetically here now, I'm going to say for the next 1 minute, we are co-designing a new residential service. Residential services can sometimes be controversial. Let me tell you, it was controversial when I was in Queensland yesterday. They've got 1,759 kids in residential care, hence why it's a bit controversial. So we're co-designing. Who's in the room? Who do we want at our table? Anyone? Young people, brilliant. Anyone else? Who else is going to be in the room? Providers, okay. Young people, providers, who else? Carers, okay, carers. You mean carers like staff? Yeah, okay. Government, excellent. Who else do we want in the room? Community leaders, okay. Excellent. Huh? Academics, okay. Oh my gosh, I love you. Do you hear what Jasmine said then? Parents. How many other people said that to me this week? Not one. So, do we consider multiple sources? Of course, we might have got there in the end, but typically, there's always an interested party that gets left out. And Eric's talked to us about multiple sources, and we can all get the scientific literature, organizational sector data, but when it comes to that box, practitioners, we all love ourselves, so we're going to be in the room, right? But when it comes to that box of stakeholders, values and concerns, we tend to sort of flip around a little bit, and sometimes we forget fundamentals. And in that particular instance, parents, yes. I sat in a room, no one here from Queensland, is there? Right. Last week with the minister, with 70 represented people about, and young people, and to say that having the young people's voice was critical and set the tone for the day, and we were looking at the problem of residential care in Queensland because of the high numbers. Not one parent was in the room. And it's logical, isn't it, that the parents of the children that have been removed that would be in a service. But we don't necessarily do that well. So when we're looking in our sector about how we use multiple sources of evidence, we have to pay attention to what the multiple sources need to be. And we don't always do it well or get it right. So how can we do that better? Deb asked the question. We didn't set this up. How do we slow down? We work in a sector where we are funded to deliver X. It could be an early intervention program. That means hours of service that potentially is what our measurement is. We could be delivering foster care service. We could be delivering a particular program. Could be domestic violence. Whole range of things, but they're normally reasonably described. And wouldn't it be great if we could start to turn the conversation around? Because who knows the definition of insanity? Same thing over and over again, expecting the same outcome. Who would say confidently, now we've had, Deb, how much investment have we had in the last 4 years? A couple of billion?
Yeah, maybe
1.5 billion. Are we doing better? Don't know. We got a no. Anyone got a yes? Something. But we don't know why. Is it important to know why? Eric mentioned that evidence-based practice started in medicine in 1990. What he didn't mention was what happened before. Did you go to the doctors and just go, eeny, meeny, miny, mo, let's see if this works for you? Which do you think we do more often than not? If we're really honest, right? We might be trying things, but we don't know why. So what we need to do better as a sector is how we use, and when I say research evidence here, I mean all the evidence that we've just been talking about, not necessarily saying, because it's an all input to the research of the design of what we want to achieve. So Eric talked about, we always start with what's the problem we're trying to solve. These are on your desks too if you want to see, and you're going to get copies of all the slides. And sometimes it's quite hard to narrow it down because people, we're all humans, we like to overcomplicate. But it's really worth spending a bit of time clarifying the problem we want to solve. And maybe we just focus on that one, even though there might be 25 others attached to it. And when we look at that, it's often worth checking, well, what's really getting in the way of success? We had an example this week from an agency, and the problem they wanted to solve was, of course, violence against women and keeping women safe. So there's a risk to women's safety. So, you know, that's a pretty neat little problem. Today you're going to work on a problem that is a problem for many of us in Australia. But if we're thinking about our own practice, when we go back to our organizations, when we're talking with funders, coming up with new things, they're talking big data, they've analyzed something, well, what area are we looking at? We're looking at a risk factor. Is that what we're trying to solve? Are we looking at a program? Is that the thing where, you know, is that the problem? Is it not working? Is it the current system issue? This is one we don't talk about enough, isn't it? In terms of the way maybe the system gets in to preventing us from being able to do something well. Do we measure the success of the system? And of course, many of you might be familiar with implementation and all of the barriers to success when you maybe, I've given you all $1 million, you've all got your new program, you've all done all your research, you've got multiple sources, and you've gone, right, I know what I'm going to do with $1 million, and I'm going to solve this problem. And then when you go out to implement it, you don't get any referrals. How many people have started a program and struggle to get referrals? And you don't like to say that out loud, yeah, because then you're worried that that lady in that table there's going to, on the phone, get that funding away from Carolyn. Carolyn Chisholm, you know. Sorry, not you, Carolyn, as in Carolyn Chisholm. But it's a bit like that, isn't it? We get a bit nervous. Get a bit nervous about actually unpacking sometimes the barriers. And it's, as Eric said, there are confounders that get in the way. And it's the same with when we implement things. There's confounders that get in the way, so we need to sort of unpack that. It's also really important to understand, and again, slow down in the moment, to go back to Deb's question about, well, if something becomes a problem, how did it come about? Not to pick again on Queensland, now I'm going to pick on New South Wales. That if you've been following the media at all in New South Wales, they've been talking a lot about kids in motels. Terrible issue, isn't it? Does it happen here in Victoria? Oh, it sure does. Hasn't made the news, though. It's in the news there. We've got a few journalists that really want to rev that one up. And if you're in Queensland, the journalists want to say that all the kids in Resi are going out there and they're criminals. They're running people over in the streets. We're doing something a bit better with journalism in Victoria, I have to say, because some of the nasty stories aren't coming out. But we're all aware of them, and we shouldn't ignore that because we are in a privileged position of knowing. But if it does get in the media, then the problem can sometimes get overinflated, and the causal factors, such as, for example, kids in Resi, they're all criminals in Queensland, 1,759 kids. Of the 1,759, 70 have got a dual youth justice background. So in a percentage term, it's not a high number. Speak to somebody in Queensland about the issue, they'll say all the kids in Resi are criminals. So you're not going to necessarily do a youth justice initiative for the 1,759 kids in Resi, are you? But you could be driven to do that if that's what people think the problem is. Really important to understand how people define it. And then, of course, there are always those indicators. And do we pay attention to the indicators? Do we even have indicators in place? So in New South Wales, they lead the way in Australia in terms of what? In a positive sense. In terms of the AIHW data, they actually have become the only state that has seen less kids removed and placed into care in the last 5 years. They're trending down. They're doing something well. People would say, well, how'd they do that? We could all guess. I'd like to say it's those evidence-based programs we set up a few years ago. We don't know. But they actually don't have the same number of children removed as they did 5 years ago. However, they have got an escalating number of kids going into residential care. Does that make sense? What's happening? Answers on the screen. Less foster carers, and also they've got a really high placement breakdown rate. So the kids that are in care, their placements are breaking down, hence they're going into resi, so they don't have the demand. Eric was the one that asked me this question this week. He said, oh, you've got this foster care problem, Lisa, with his quirky accent. What's causing it? We've got all this demand, all these children being removed around Australia. Do we? Anyone know? No. Number of children being removed is trending down. So something else is going on, and we haven't actually stopped to say, has anybody formed a task force and said, right, we're going to get around this problem? But something has changed, and whether that's positive or negative. So Eric's next question to me then was, right, well, if you're not removing more children and the data's going down, that must mean something else is going on. The children have got more complexity in the system. Well, it's probably, we would all say, yeah, that's probably correct. So when it comes to indicators, these are really important for us to pay attention to and not just looking at one. It's very easy to get distracted by one, makes us think a certain way. We've got a solution here immediately. We should be thinking of a number of different factors, and they come from what we call indicators. Now, I asked both in Queensland and in New South Wales, with their particular main problems, did they compare with any other jurisdictions? So, Queensland's got the highest number of kids in residential care in Australia. Victoria's got the lowest. Has anyone in Queensland rang you up and asked you why? They've asked you. They've asked me. Well, that's good, right? But the thing is how often do you find, not necessarily outside of your jurisdiction, you might be just sitting in your own organisation, do you ring another organisation and say, have you got the same problem as me? Is there anyone, any CEOs in the room? Do you ever ring any of your colleagues and say, well, good. Say, have you got the same problem as me? Yeah? Well, that's good. Good, outstanding CEOs. But it's not necessarily, I say then, well, nobody's rang me and asked me if I've got the same problem as them. I've been a CEO for 10 years. The amount of times CEOs have actually rang me and asked me that, I can count on less than one hand. You're an exception. You've done this course. You're a golden. Jurisdiction, and heaven forbid we would look overseas, because we kind of, don't necessarily like to do that. Would it be possible that the same issues we have here in Australia happen anywhere else? Very likely, isn't it? And if we multiplied this room by all the practitioners that work on things we work on around the world, there's a lot of people that are in this space. There's a lot of talented people that we can get sources of validation from. And we touched on this in terms of our core design kind of issue. When you're looking at framing up the problem, do we stop and look at the problem from different perspectives? If people have had the privilege of being in one of those core design workshops or being in meetings where the voice of children and young people in particular has been invited, the most common thing, there's two things that I will always take away when I listen very intently to young people is, one, you sort of think, well, the rest of us should just stop talking now because it's pretty meaningless when you hear directly from the young person of the impact of sometimes the harms we cause. But the second thing they'll say is, you're all talking gobbledygook. You're using fancy acronyms and terms that are pretty meaningless. Yet we seem to sort of think it's an acceptable thing to grab a bunch of young people, bring them along to a meeting where we're all dressed up in fancy, you know, Next pants with my makeshift belt, and think, oh, well, now we're getting the voice of the young person. Why wouldn't we go out to where the young person is comfortable? Why wouldn't we put a hoodie on, man, and get down on the floor on a beanbag, hey? But we don't, do we? So the perspective of how we collect evidence would change, yeah, if we were going to be very genuine in the way we do that. If we have, of course, identified the problem, how then do we frame up options? Is it good to sort of just, I mean, how many people, if you're honest, have got a brilliant program that you love? How many have got a brilliant program that you love? Yeah. Thank you for being honest. Thank you, Deb, for being honest. How many times have you tried to sell your program to someone?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh, that's all I do. I expect a lot of people have all got things that they do that they think work.
Yeah.
I think there's always questions about being able to gather the evidence. Sometimes that can feel expensive, but it's all I do, constantly.
And it's a natural thing. We think it's working. We want people, more people should get it. More people should get it. But of course, do we know they need it? And is there something similar to what I deliver that may equally be as beneficial? Or, if we go back to what Eric was talking about, if we're really trying to see if there's a cause and effect, if Deb's program is really going to be effective, but it's the only one, what are we going to need to make sure to be able to tell Deb's program's really effective? What else do we need? Well, we need a pre-measure, yeah, and a post-measure, but what else will be handy? Getting there, getting warm. So if we do something over here, a control group. Yeah. So if we're going to check that Deb's program is needed by more people, better sales pitch, let's get a control group. Let's see if the people that didn't get Deb's service did the same, better or worse. Yeah? And probably, if I'm thinking, could be one of many of the great programs that the centre does back. And sometimes you're going to sort of be saying, oh, but Lisa, you know, it's how can we do that? It's very expensive. Where are we going to find these people? And it's not suitable for everyone, right? So in that design, we need to start thinking about, if we're going to be really effective, we're going to start being able to be more, to get services that probably are hugely impactful. That's the way we're going to more fairly distribute to get services where they're needed by the populations that need them. How many people, in terms of multiple sources of evidence, many people this week have said to us, oh, Eric, I haven't got time to read research articles. And more importantly, I don't know how to access them. I'm not in a university, they're behind paywalls. For those of you that maybe love ChatGPT, it's great for writing rewriting your resume, writing your bio, writing a bit of an ad for a sales. Is it good for finding research papers?
Terrible.
Terrible. Why? Why is it terrible for finding research papers?
Because it looks at a very restricted amount of studies and it doesn't really look out of the box.
Well, in fact, it doesn't have access to any research papers because they're behind a paywall. And so it has, of course, it only has access to information on the World Wide Web up to 2021. And if you trick it, if you say, hey, ChatGPT, tell me, or write me an evidence-based response for professional foster care, and I tested this once, and make sure you reference it, it will do it, and it will all be fake. And it will just, do as it's instructed, but it did actually make up every reference. So ChatGPT is very useful, but it doesn't have access to research articles. They're not peer-reviewed articles. They're behind paywalls, so it's not going to give you that sort of information, but it can kind of point you in the right direction. Google Scholar, far better. It will show you abstracts of research databases. They still might be behind a paywall, but as Eric will show, you can get a lot of information out of an abstract, more often than not, whether the findings are in the field that you're looking at. But as I mentioned earlier, around the world, there's lots of people like us who have been doing work very similar to us for many, many decades, and have been researching the same problems that we have been working on. And they have taken the time to upload the success of their work into menus of evidence. Is everyone familiar with the menu here in Victoria, the DFFH menu of evidence? Yeah, some nods, some are familiar with it. So there are multiple, and I'm going to give you Lisa's handy list. So if you are wondering about if there's something in your organization, or there's a program that you're delivering and you are wanting to know, is there any research out there that actually has been critiqued for its trustworthiness around a particular problem area, then check out one of the menus of evidence. They have spent hours, and DFFH did a fabulous job here in Victoria of starting their menu of evidence. But there's also menus in the US, there's menus in Canada, there's menus in the UK, and I'll show you a list of them all. You can play around with. They're very handy, and they actually grade the quality. So we had this great question here from this gentleman about researchers researching themselves. There might be model purveyors. They've done, what they try and do to sort of offset that is to get other authors check their work and be peer reviewed. But when they try and get their model or program onto one of these menus of evidence, then the people reviewing that do a critique of that exact question that, what was your name? That Jonathan mentioned. The other really important thing, of course, is understanding what benefits you want to achieve. So Deb said she's always trying to sell her program. It's a really great program. And what's really important, though, is that we check that the very people that we want the program to benefit, check in with them that that program is actually going to deliver the benefit that they need, that it's matched to whatever presenting issue they have. And this one, Eric gave a couple of examples of harmful programs. Has anybody ever checked for whether your program does any harm? Safeguards, checking. So controversial topic if we work with our First Nations children and young people, yeah? We can be honest, and we know that for years we have caused great harm. Great harm. How many organizations here work with First Nations children and young people? Yeah, let's be honest,
Yes, we have people on the stage here who are talking about children and families in hotels, in Masterclass.
Yeah. So what safeguards, when we are working, do we put in place to make sure we don't do harm? We sometimes make the assumption that we've been asked to deliver that service, then therefore it's better than how many times have we said that? Better to get the service than not, yeah? So it's really important that we pay attention to these things if we're really going to design and deliver programs based on the best available evidence from multiple sources that is critically appraised. And of course, Jonathan from Anglicare would know that if you bring in an American model to Australia, it's not necessarily going to fit perfectly into our context, is it? Because whilst it might be that we, on paper, see that the model says, yes, these are the outcomes we can expect, there's great research behind it, but it's highly likely that in this system, in this context, there will be adaptations that are necessary. Now, the model purveyors that own the IP, they don't like it if you say the term adaptation, you can't muck with my recipe, but when we talk about adapting, it's adapting to context, it's adapting to the system. DFFH have got a set of rules, you know, we have to think about whether we do any harm to our First Nations people, we have to think about if it's delivered in Mount Isa in remote far north Queensland, that's a lot different from New York City. So we have to be brave, and we have to call this out, right? Can't just sit there and go, just because you did the research, that makes it fine. And then, of course, there will be stakeholder views that will influence the acceptability of those benefits, harms, and costs. So it would be great that if we did this in a very linear sense, and we said that kids in motels in Victoria is an issue, it's doing harm to children, that in terms of how we look at the acceptability of an option that's an alternative, that we weigh up all of the benefits, harms, and costs, wouldn't it? That would be nice if we co-design things in a really good way. And we talked about implementation. Eric mentioned it as well in terms of evidence-based practice. There's always going to be barriers and facilitators to successful implementation. And if we think about those multiple sources, and if we use the model that Eric showed earlier, then we really need to think about when we are implementing something, if we've come up with a problem we're trying to solve, we've done our research and understanding on what's matched to the need, but it's not going to be successful unless we think about, well, you know, with families, with children, how do they learn about our programs? We have to pay attention to all the things then in terms of how you put it into the local context. Staff, if it's a new evidence-based model that Jonathan's decided to implement from, you know, Sweden, and there's a set of guidelines, if I would put it into practice, they might be quite different from the guidelines of the last model he brought in. There might be a bit of change management that needs to go on within the organization. Within your own organization, you might have a performance management system. Lynette kindly shared all of the different systems for capturing there. There's a wonderful outcomes framework that Windermere have, and I'm sure that there needed to be a bit of work done behind the scenes to build the framework in the first place. So organizations will have systems changes if you're going to be bringing in new measures to sort of see if you've got those causal relationships from programs that you've designed based on the evidence. And that might mean as well that there might need to be some system changes, because from our lovely person from DFFH said, oh, hours of service, that's what we're going to capture. Lynette's got a new outcomes framework, it's evidence-based, she's brought together multiple sources of evidence. It's not looking at hours, it's actually looking at outcomes. Doesn't really work with the contract. So how do we get past that? Because one then stops the other. So Lynette can't be successful with her new outcomes framework because she's got to then retrofit hours of service and to spend an awful amount of time. So you can see all these implementation things that get in the way of something that's very well kind of designed. There's a list of some of the menus of evidence that kind of are most pertinent for the work we do here in child welfare. Some from Victoria, some from Australia, the US, the UK. These are all very highly credible, and I recommend you check them all out. We also found out yesterday that if you go into the State Library of Queensland, they have got free access to, I think, Eric, it was about 6 databases. We saw 6 research databases. So if you are interested in looking at single studies, or you could be searching for a systematic literature review or a meta-analysis, go to the State Library of Queensland, and you could use their free databases, much like you would if you were at a university. So everyone will get a copy of the slides sent out post-workshop.